Abe Foxman, the person we're going to interview now, is one of the best known person in activism against anti-Semitism. He was the chief executive for decades of the Anti-Defamation League, the major American organization fighting against racism and anti-Semitism. After his retirement a few years ago, he is now focusing on establishing in New York the first museum on anti-Semitism, which will open, I guess, in 2019 or 20.
There are today in the world, Manfred, about 50 museums on the Holocaust, on the Shoah. They tell an episodic tragedy of the Jewish people, but I'm not sure they're relevant as they were in earlier years. I'm involved with the Museum of Jewish History, which is also a living memorial to the Shoah, and I've been walking with the students since I retired in the museum, wanting to engage them. And I hear the following in one way or another. The Dominican student or the Bangladeshi or the Pakistani or whatever would say to me in one way or another, well, this is interesting. The Germans hated the Jews. They killed the Jews. They made up with the Jews. What relevance is it to me? And in truth, it has very little relevance today. I convinced the board of directors to rebuild the museum with a permanent exhibit on anti-Semitism. If you want to understand the Shoah, if you want to understand the Holocaust, you have to understand anti-Semitism. It didn't happen in a vacuum. It didn't happen in one country by itself. Somebody once wrote why Hitler was successful. Hitler was successful because first they came and said, you cannot live amongst us as Jews. Convert. Then a couple hundred years later, they shortened that phrase and they said, you cannot live amongst us. Expulsions. Then Hitler came and said, you cannot live. Had it not been for the previous history of Jews being singled out in every generation, in every regime, in every religion. So why is it relevant? Because then I can say to my Dominican and Pakistani student in New York, this is the mother of all prejudices. Jews have always been the other, regardless of what language and culture, whether things were fine. And you as a student and as a young man, you can be the other in the Bronx, in Queens, or in Florida. And therefore, I need you to understand that you need to stand up. And therefore, the Shoah becomes relevant. Because if you don't, then you go to second floor and third floor, and you see what hate can do. So I'm gathering artifacts. We're in the process of hiring a curator, and it will be the first step to understand the Shoah.
What will be there in the museum?
Well, we will have artifacts. Strangely enough, there are some good Jews who have spent years collecting this bigotry, and some of them now in their 70s and 80s, their children don't want it, are looking for a place, but will have an educational permanent place. And so there'll be a place to research it, be a place to study it, but also to learn from it.
Where will the museum go up?
Well, the museum already there is in Battery Place in New York between the 9/11 Museum and the Statue of Liberty. We have a building. We have the Museum of Jewish Heritage. We are rebuilding it, rebranding it, and that's where it will be.
What artifacts are there from early centuries?
Well, from early centuries, there's still writings, unfortunately. But in the last 200-300 years, we have artifacts, unfortunately. We have art, we have ceramics, we have carvings. It's there. It's, even hate is creative.
Where do you start? Before Josephus?
Yes. Yes. It's a long time back. Yeah.
What is your first point?
Well, it has to be. Well, we're beginning to analyze how we will tell the story, and there are many ways to tell the story.
You start from scroll of Esther?
Yeah, we can, but some say we should start with the 30 pieces of silver, but depends.
You cover the whole world?
We will try. Well,
Yeah.
you can't, but to the extent that you can show its permanence and its continuity and its unbelievable survival of this hatred to this day, is a phenomenon that needs to be studied and understood.
With your long experience, how do you view the acceleration of anti-Semitism in the world currently?
I think the most dramatic acceleration comes out of the creation of the development of the internet. I think the internet, while on one hand is a vehicle for information, education, and knowledge, it has also provided a superhighway for anti-Semitism, bigotry, and prejudice. I recently said it's like a tsunami all of a sudden. We have been taught how do you answer hate, good speech versus bad speech, but when the hate comes in a tsunami, anonymous, how do you deal with it? I think it's given it more legitimacy, it's given it more visibility, it's given it more greater world impact. So that's the most significant. The other, of course, is nuances of we're in an era of populism, of supranationalism. We're in an era where the enemy of the major enemy of the Jewish people, which was the Christian church, has now become an ally, and now a religion which for many thought throughout the years was more tolerant, which is Islam, has become radical Islam. So that becomes a threat, and anti-Semitism is a major element of many of the communities today. It's a lot of the same under new vehicles and new technology, and we have to find ways to deal with that technology. I would say, in summary, the internet, which has taken over our lives, has already destroyed privacy, but it's on the way to destroy civility. We, the Jewish people, as a minority, need civility as a blanket to protect us from the arrows, and that civility is disappearing, and therefore all things are more and more acceptable.